financing restrictions are rampant in co-op buildings. It's really their main way of weeding out people that they do not feel are prestigious enough to live in these buildings. And the way they do that is by limiting the percentage that you can finance. In this episode, I'm going to let you decide. Has the prestige and the appeal of co-ops in New York City dwindled? Stay tuned, we're covering everything here. This is Real Estate Investing in New York with Christina Kremidas, helping you achieve a future of financial success by making intelligent real estate investment decisions today. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Real Estate Investing in New York with me, Christina Kremidas. In this episode, I am going to dive into the reasons why many people have started to fall away from the glitz and the glamour idea of a Manhattan co-op residence. But at the end of the day, they are good for some people, and I'm going to let you hear both sides, and then you ultimately decide what is best for you. Let's first talk about the other property type if you're buying in a building in New York City, which is the condo property, right? We'll talk about condo quickly, address why people like them, and then we'll spend the rest of the time of this episode on co-ops. Firstly, the condo is a newer product. We did a recent episode on the show that you can listen to where we actually spoke all about new development condos. And most of New York's new development scene, if you are looking for something brand new, pristine, never before lived in, this is going to be a condo residence. So most of the condos you'll see on the market are more updated, newer buildings. There is less condo inventory on the market as compared to co-ops. And something that's interesting about the condo product is that it's much easier to purchase. So firstly, it is considered real estate, which means that technically you own the physical space within the walls of your apartment, and you also own a percentage share of the common elements of the building. And when you close on a condo, when you purchase a condo, you receive a deed the same way you would receive one if you purchased a private house, for example. This, when it comes to living in the apartment and using it, doesn't really make all that much of a difference to you versus the co-ops, which I'll explain later, but it's just something interesting to keep in mind. Foreign buyers are allowed to purchase in condos, which is usually not allowed in co-op buildings, which means that it's very easy to sell a condo. Pretty much anyone that comes with the cash can buy in a condo building. It's very rare that a condo will reject an applicant. They might reject an applicant if they are like a criminal. They see in their background check that there is some type of like really bad credit or criminal activity of some kind, but very rare to be rejected from a condo building. Additionally, condos will allow you to finance pretty much whatever you want to. You can finance typically up to 90% in condo buildings. Sometimes you can get away with financing even more. It depends on the building itself, as opposed to co-ops that are very restrictive in how much you can finance, if you can finance at all. There's a lot of flexibility in terms of the requirements that are needed to purchase a condo building. So if you're someone that has the cash to spend, but you don't really show as much an income, or you just maybe are more private and you don't want to open up your whole life history on an application, you're better off with condos, and their policies are very flexible. So you can sublet them freely, which is great for investors. You can purchase an apartment for your relative or for your daughter or son, family member. If the owner of the unit is not the one living there, it's usually okay. And also pied-à-terre. Pied-à-terres are allowed in condo buildings, which is part-time residents, not always allowed in co-op buildings. Most of the inventory of housing units that are available in the downtown area tend to skew a bit more condo as well. So you will find that fresh, new downtown clientele is looking at condo residences. Now for the co-ops. There are certain things about the co-op that have been very revered throughout the years. And this is mainly the element of exclusivity. in co-op buildings in Manhattan. They feel like private social clubs. They're not easy to buy into. They really make it difficult to buy in a co-op. And for that reason, you could see them as selective, you could see them as exclusive, but there's an air of prestige that comes along with getting into one of these reputable co-op buildings. The assumption is that you've been highly vetted, you had excellent financials, and that's why you can live there. Technically, you own shares in a corporation when you buy a co-op. So differently than the condo, you receive a proprietary lease. When you close on a co-op apartment, you do not receive a deed. Again, it doesn't really mean much in the perspective of things if you're living in the building. It feels the same as the way it would feel if you were living in a condo. But technically, you own shares of a corporation, and the corporation's main asset is this building. So there's more politics involved. You're discussing things with your shareholders. Things that you want to do are dependent upon your fellow shareholders approving it. Something I saw recently was an article in the Wall Street Journal that caught my eye, and it said something along the lines of, co-ops aren't the status symbol that they used to be. And the article went into some information about why today's new clientele is choosing condo buildings over co-op buildings. I can confirm that that is the case. I see it with my clientele. There hasn't been so much historically of a huge difference when it comes to actual sales in terms of market share for condos versus co-ops. There hasn't been a dramatic change, but there is so much inventory in New York City that is co-op, because that is originally what most of the inventory was. Most of the buildings in Manhattan, even as much as 80%, were always co-op buildings. So there always will be that volume. And they're more affordable than condo buildings. So often people end up choosing it just from a value perspective. So there will always be your co-op sales. But in terms of if you could choose, all things considered, everything else is equal, condo versus co-op, people are 100% leaning condo nowadays. What used to be a sign of prestige simply is no longer very interesting to today's modern buyer. People are leaning more towards the brand new amenity suites that you see in new condo buildings instead of an old heritage building that just has a doorman, even though it's very prestigious to get into. Co-ops simply do not appreciate as aggressively as condos do. This was always the case. It will be the case. If you purchase a co-op for $1 million and a condo for $1 million in the same period of time, the condo is going to be more expensive as the years go on. This is because co-op apartments tend to have strict guidelines and rules that simply limit your buyer pool. And whenever your buyer pool is limited, it automatically results in a lower sale price for that apartment because we have less people who can potentially buy it. So that's a good principle in real estate in general to always keep in mind, that whenever your buyer pool is limited, your sale price is diminished. Examples of strict requirements and protocols that exist in co-op buildings that typically do not exist in condo buildings are pet policies, for example. It's much more common for a co-op building in the city to restrict pets. Some do not allow dogs or cats. Some only allow cats. Some are very strict about the size of the animal that you can have if it allows animals. And this is much more prevalent in co-ops versus condo products. Financing restrictions are rampant in co-op buildings. It's really their main way of weeding out people that they do not feel are prestigious enough to live in these buildings. And the way they do that is by limiting the percentage that you can finance. So as opposed to a condo where you can finance 80% or 90% in order to purchase there, meaning you only need 20% of the value of that apartment in cash on hand in order to buy it, for a co-op, you will see a lot of buildings that limit how much you can finance. Some buildings only allow you to finance 50%, 60%. Some don't allow financing at all. As a general building policy, you can only live there if you have cash. So what we see is less people being able to get into the building. And you might think, oh, with this type of prestige, it must be so expensive. But it's not. The fact that there's this limitation involved takes a lot of consumers out of the equation, because even if they can afford it, they may not want to wait for a cash buyer when they decide to eventually sell it. So they want ease, especially nowadays. People want ease. So nobody wants to buy not nobody, I'm not going to say nobody, but there are less people today than previously who want to buy something that might be a pain to offload when you don't want it anymore. Especially today, there's much more of the culture of living in many places, right? So if you buy a co-op apartment and you had to invest all your cash to buy it, and they're going to limit if you can sublet that apartment or not. What happens in, today's day and age where you want to move to a different country for a certain number of years, or even just move out of the city for a while? You might not be able to sublet that apartment and all your cash is tied up. So you're kind of stuck, right? Some buildings are even strict about letting a relative live there while you're not there. It's not as flexible as people want to be now. Discussing the subletting policies, usually co-ops will allow some subletting. Sometimes they'll let you rent it out to another person for a year or two. Sometimes they're flexible and they'll let you rent out for 2 years out of every 5 years, for example. So within a 5-year time frame, you have to live there for 3 years. You can sublet for 2 years. But once you've subletted for 2 years, you have to move back until your 5-year cycle is up. This deters people from subletting. Of course, you can't purchase that apartment if your intention is to be an investor and have a long-term tenant in place. It would just never make sense for you. And in terms of 2 years out of every 5 being allowed to rent, I don't see many people ever really doing that on a cyclical basis. Like, who's going to live somewhere for 2 years, move out for 3, and then conveniently be ready to move back for another 2? It just doesn't really work. It's just a way of deterring people from subletting for more than 2 years at a time. Co-ops are very concerned about the culture and the community that's living in the building. So your neighbors tend to all know each other. Sometimes it's amazing, and sometimes that comes along with politics that can get undesirable, but they do care about maintaining the longevity of the community in the building. They prefer not to have a lot of transients, people moving in, people moving out. They like your long-term primary resident in a condo building. To talk quickly about the purchase requirements, which is one of the strict policies, if not the biggest deterrent when buying a co-op, is there are 2 specific very strict financial criteria that all buyers must meet in order to be approved for a co-op apartment in Manhattan or Brooklyn, or even outside of those 2 boroughs. They're rampant in New York City in general. These 2 financial requirements are debt to income ratio and post-closing liquidity. The meaning of these are as follows. Debt to income ratio is the percentage that you get when you divide all of your monthly expenses by your monthly income. So the proposed apartment that you're looking to buy is included in the debt portion of that ratio, as well as any other mortgages you might have, any loans, student loans, personal loans, any childcare payments, auto loan payments, any recurring monthly payments that you make. All get added together and it's divided by your monthly income pre-tax. So that percentage, in order to get into a co-op, needs to be about 25%. You can sometimes stretch it to 26%, 27%. This is much stricter than a bank would use if they were qualifying you for a mortgage. A bank will approve somebody for a mortgage with as much as a 45, for example, debt to income ratio, which means that your debts can be up to 45% of your income every month. In a co-op building, they really do not want to see your debts, your total debts exceeding a quarter of your monthly income. So it's a very strict and not very easy criteria to meet. The other one that I mentioned, financial criteria, is called post-closing liquidity. Post-closing liquidity is the amount of cash that you need to have on hand after you close on that apartment. So after you put down the price of the apartment at the closing, whether it's a cash deal and you're paying for the apartment in full, or you're doing a deal with a loan, with a mortgage, and you're putting down your down payment, whatever you owe at the closing table plus your closing costs, after those dollar amounts are taken out of your account, in order for you to be approved to buy this co-op, you must have at least 2 years of apartment carrying costs in liquid cash after closing, which means 24 months worth of maintenance payments and, if applicable, mortgage payments. That can get pretty pricey. Imagine if you're spending $10,000 a month on the apartment, they want to see about $240,000 minimum in your bank, cash, liquid assets. They don't really want to see investments. They don't want to see 401k. These are all things that are volatile, and they know most likely you're not tapping into your 401k, for example, to pay for this co-op. So they want to see it in liquid cash. Now, that for many people is a bit difficult. It's not always easy to come up with that much extra when you are buying there. So again, it's a way of firstly securing the asset and making sure that people are not unpaid, but also it's a way that they can legally weed out people that are not wealthy, right? People that don't have extra money. When you're working your way through the application process for a co-op, it's often nothing short of a nightmare. We did a recent episode on it that you might remember, but to be brief about it, all of your financials are opened up. Your financials are an open book during the application process for the co-op. Usually there are many letters of recommendation that you need to provide, and every source of cash that you put towards this apartment purchase must be substantiated. Bank statements for everything. 2 years of bank statements for everything. So if you received a gift, they're going to see that gift hit your account recently, and you have to substantiate who gave it to you, prove that you do not owe that money back to this person, and then the building needs to be okay with it too. They have to be okay with the whole dynamic of your entire purchase. And the end of the application process is an interview, which is very personal. Usually they only invite you in for the interview once they've already reviewed your application and they decide that what is on paper is good enough for them. And then the interview is an opportunity where they can just be subjective. In some buildings, it's merely a formality, but in other buildings, they are subjectively deciding if they like you or not, and they can reject you for any reason at all. They do not need to provide explanation. Unfortunately, we do see discrimination in co-op buildings. We see people get rejected for reasons that boil my blood. I've had co-ops try to reject applicants of mine for being a single income household where the woman was the earner. Like, how wild is that in today's day and age? They didn't understand the fact that a woman could be the sole earner in a household, and they were worried that if she was to lose her job, they didn't know what their young child would do. Like, they didn't understand what the mother would do to keep the family afloat. They had a young child. Really, if the sole earner of any household loses their income, you have some problem solving to do, right? And whether it's the woman or the man in that equation, you're probably going to be looking for the same solutions. So you see some very old-fashioned things go down in co-ops. You see some things that can really get you annoyed, but it happens, period. It just happens. That's the way it is in co-op buildings. On the same note of the fact that they can reject anyone for any reason, it doesn't even have to do with if you're qualified. They use personal reasons to decide if they're going to reject you or not. For example, there are very famous, wealthy celebrities who have been rejected from co-op buildings, to name a few. Madonna, Calvin Klein, Richard Nixon. They have all been declined from co-op buildings. The Dakota building turned down Billy Joel and Cher, famously. The Ardsley building rejected Mariah Carey. 740 Park Avenue rejected Barbra Streisand. And Diane Keaton was rejected from the River House. How wild is that? They were concerned about the spotlight on the building. They were concerned about potential crowds that might come as a result of a celebrity going in and out. They were concerned with, privacy of residents. And also, this is an opportunity for boards to simply just exercise some power. Like, how often does a regular person get the chance to deny a wealthy celebrity something that they want? Very rarely. And you do see very often these types of ego plays when we're applying to co-op buildings. Sometimes it's just a matter of them not allowing gifts. Like, if a person wants to buy the apartment in a co-op and they are receiving a gift to do it, why should that person be so lucky? Why should that applicant get a gift? We're going to let this underqualified person that was lucky enough to receive a gift get into our building. Why? Like, they're not at our level. This is how boards operate. This is how they think. So, like it or not, hopefully there will be co-op reform that comes soon, but that's the way it is right now. And a lot of our modern day clientele are like, no, thank you. I don't need this, right? So this is why we're seeing the trend go the way that we're seeing it. Usually United States citizenship is required in co-op buildings as well. So that makes the foreign investor aspect of the equation more difficult, which again limits your buyer pool, limits the maximum sale price because you have less people bidding for it. There's a lot of money that comes into New York City real estate from foreign investments and people that want to put a tenant in place and have another income stream. So that's totally ruled out with the co-ops. Oftentimes, you are not allowed to purchase in the name of an LLC in co-op buildings. So buyers who value their privacy and don't want their name on the public-facing documents will have a hard time. If you want to buy in an LLC, some buildings that are co-ops are a little bit more flexible. Others will make you jump through hoops to get it done. They'll make you provide a ton of LLC information, sometimes more trouble than it's worth, and other buildings will just not allow you to do it at all. Since the co-op is the original heritage property type here in the city, you usually find that those are the older buildings. Co-op buildings tend to be on the older side as compared to New York City's condo inventory. What you see as a result of this is layouts of apartments that are a bit more traditional, right? Like maybe the kitchen is totally separate and off to the side. A pro is that you might get more square footage. You usually do get more square footage, but you'll find layouts that you're probably not seeing as many co-ops with a modern style open kitchen layout with a big center island for entertaining that you would typically see in co-op buildings. Also, the amenities are usually not as expansive as in condo buildings. Condo buildings now are built with amenities in mind. Co-op buildings often feel like the amenities were an afterthought. Maybe they found a spare room and they stuck a little gym in there, and maybe luckily they have access to a common outdoor space, but usually co-op building amenities are much more humble, I guess you could say. So to sum it up, there are many ways that today's clientele is experiencing the private club aspect for those that can afford it. There are many new private social clubs nowadays. There are supper clubs, restaurants that you can only get into if you're a member. There is a serious importance now being put on this type of culture here in New York. I don't want to say that culture is over, but people are not using a very important asset as their way of getting this status. They're choosing other clubs and they're buying real estate that is going to be easy to sell and that's going to let them do what they want to do. Now, who is a co-op good for? There are certainly some people that a co-op is good for. First of all, obviously, if you're someone that has a lot of money to spend and you do not care about the inconvenience and you want to get into these prestigious buildings, then a co-op is most definitely for you. When it comes to applying for the co-op, if you have the flexibility and luxury of no specific timing, then a co-op can most definitely be for you. If you don't mind submitting that application and waiting an unknown amount of time to know if you are approved and when you can actually move in, and if you maybe have a second residence to go to, or the ability to not have to give up your current housing before moving into your new housing, then you have all the flexibility in the world and you can definitely deal with the inconveniences that might come along with buying a co-op. Additionally, there are often times when it is your more price conscious consumer that does choose the co-op. And in these cases, they're choosing the co-op in spite of its limitations and its special requirements, and more so because they are a more affordable product. So as we spoke about earlier, they don't appreciate the same way, and they always are more affordable than condo units. Co-op units in Manhattan can be up to 30% more affordable than a similarly sized, all other things equal, condo product. So the co-op is cheaper. That's just a fact. That's the way it always is. That's the way it will be. So for someone that is a regular person that just needs enough square footage to house themselves and their family members if they have them, and they want a specific amount of space within a limited budget, then you will find that there will be many more options on the market for you at the lower price point than you will find in the condo inventory. So many times, luckily, hopefully you can be, still approved. We'll make sure that you meet the debt to income standards and the post-closing liquidity standards, and you can get into a co-op building and have the space that you want if that's a primary concern for you. So there are certainly situations where the co-op is a great option, and most co-op buildings are not a nightmare. I know that we often make it sound really brutal, and it can be. I've seen plenty of co-op horror stories, but in general, you don't have to see them that way. They're not evil. They're not always difficult to live in. They're usually just fine. So that is really, meant to sum it up and to put things into perspective. And I don't want this episode to be skewed dramatically one way or another, but it's good for you as a consumer to know what property type is best for you and who's a good fit for what type of product. So I hope that was helpful. If you ever have any questions after listening to any of my episodes, I would love for you to contact me. My email address is christina.kremidas@element.com. You can also visit my website, learn more about myself and my team, and see all of my contact options at christinakremidas.com. You can always reach out to me on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok. My handles on both of those apps are christina.kremidas. And as always, thank you so much for being here, and stay tuned for the next one.